Thank you so much for listening to Classical Ideas. If you'd like to support this show, you can find the link tree to all of my work in the show notes of your podcast player. Within the link tree, you can financially support the show, locate different podcast players of choice, and find social media links to help spread the work I do here on this show. Any way you can spread the word is deeply appreciated. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. As this year comes to a close, I know everyone out there is reflecting upon the ways 2020 turned out for our global community. I can't stop thinking about it. It's been confusing, painful, turbulent, unpredictable, and I've struggled to find beauty. These conversations I have on this podcast and elsewhere keep me going because of the small accomplished goals and senses of achievement I get from having inspiring conversations. In March and April, I had conversations about the pandemic with several fantastic folks, and it keeps coming up. In my previous episode, I spoke with Dr. Harold Morales, where we touched on what his neighbors in Baltimore are doing as their spiritual and religious houses of worship and practice grapple with the ways this year has upended the way we gather for sacred activities. In this episode, we extend the conversation on Baltimore with Dr. Morales' colleague, Karim Amin. Karim Amin is an educator and arts activist from West Baltimore. Karim is a graduate student candidate pursuing a master's in public administration with a conflict management and negotiations background at the University of Baltimore. Karim was a charter member of Black Arts District Coalition, the committee responsible for establishing the Pennsylvania Avenue Black Arts District, the first Black Arts District in Maryland. Karim currently is the executive director of Voices of 21217. Voices of 21217 is a youth-based nonprofit, and it's focused on developing arts programming and funding to bring mixed-use development to the Pennsylvania Avenue Black Arts District located in West Baltimore. You can visit Karim's website at voicesof21217.com to get in touch. In this conversation, we discuss his work with the Oral History and Ephemera Project, his local outreach with Baltimore youth, local mosques, and the legal community in Baltimore during the pandemic. This is an awesome conversation with someone firmly rooted in a community, doing work engaging with neighbors every day. Thanks again to Karim for joining me, so please join my conversation with Karim Amin. Brother Karim Amin, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you, Gregory.
This is a delight to have you here. Do you just want to go ahead and spend a moment and introduce yourself to the audience, however you see fit?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Karim Amin. I am a artistic community advocate. I use arts as healing, arts through education. And one of my main focuses is using faith to guide our practice, and faith can come in many forms. I grew up as a Muslim in Baltimore City, Drew Hill and North Avenue. Very proud of that. And that's where I was educated, both in school and actually on the streets. And that's where I really learned that I wanted to get into the work that I'm into now, which is arts and using arts as healing, and using it throughout my entire life. And so I am very excited to be a part of this podcast. Being in community has really changed a lot over the last year in 2020.
Yeah.
It really has. My community has grown, contracted, then kind of grown again. People have revealed themselves. I'm a big sci-fi geek as well. So I've been watching Lovecraft Country a lot. And I'll talk a little bit about how that relates to what we're going to talk about today. But that's been an awesome way to kind of live, not only living through this really wild time in 2020 and actually using oral history as a way to center voices, but also looking at the different artistic things online and things that I've been looking at online and how that relates to my life. And so it's kind of wild because it feels like, is it art imitating life, or is life now imitating art? So Yeah, love to get into that discussion.
Awesome. Well, I'm always curious on guests' backstories and how they came to be interested in what they're interested in. And I know that you're really into oral histories, and it's the project that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But how did you come to be interested in story, in history, in storytelling, and in the stories that people tell about the places that they're from? How did this all come to be an interest in your life?
Well, I could go back to really my mother. And she has been a big influence in my life, and my father, of course. But she was an educator, and she also was my principal at my school, which was
Nice.
out right at North Avenue in Drew Hill. And so you can imagine, I had to deal with her as an educator, her as a teacher. But one thing she always said was craft and create your own story. That was very important for her. One story that she shared with me that actually said to me, I really wanted to tell stories, that actually is a really enlightening, prideful, and kind of fearful story that occurred. She told me about a story of when she went to with her mother to a store. It's called Hustlers, which was downtown Baltimore City, big department store like Macy's back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And she was going to try on a hat. My grandmother was an incredible singer, a gospel singer, and she wanted to buy a hat for Sunday. So she took my mother downtown. It's when you wore your best to go downtown, ribbons and everything in her hair, and just was ready to go into the store with her mother to grab a hat for church. So they're going into the store, and the woman stops her and says, "You cannot try on a hat."
Mm.
And my mother, of course, looking at it through innocent eyes, is saying, "Well, why can't you try on a hat? You know, my mother's beautiful. She's a gospel singer in Baltimore, from East Baltimore." And it was because she was Black. She couldn't try on that hat.
Mm.
And she remembers that story. And when she tells it to me, it's really an impactful story because it's such a simple piece. But from there, she really gained a lot of strength and said, "I'm always going to be determined and do what I wanted to do." Eventually, she grew up actually to become Muslim because she didn't believe in the system that already existed for us and wanted to look at a different faith system and a different other system that she saw here in the U.S. But why I tell that too is that it's important to tell people's stories, because sometimes when we look at prejudice, when we look at not centering voices, we look at the really awful scenes of people getting beaten or the stories that we have now of social injustice, of police murdering Black people, and we think that that extreme violence is the thing that impacts people the most. And absolutely it does, as we've seen this year. But really what impacts people more are those little small stories that really create another timeline, another ripple effect. Like I said, I'm a sci-fi geek, so I love those different ripple effects that happen. And so from there, it became important for me to share our stories, and not just in ways that are, I believe in activism, I believe in protesting, in resistance. But I also believe in, if I can sometimes sit down and share with you my story, that can impact you so much more than me yelling at you, but just talking to you and connecting with you through our humanity. And even though we may not agree necessarily at the end, I was able to share with you what's going on. You got to see me as a human.
Brother Kareem, that's so interesting. I'm hearing that you like have maybe like an interfaith upbringing a little bit as well, with a little bit of Christianity, and then as well as a Muslim community. Tell me a little bit about your like spiritual practice growing up. Like, what was your community like that you were immersed in?
Yeah, so I grew up again North Avenue, Drew Hill, at the Islamic Community School, which was a full-time Muslim school. And it's very interesting because the school only had 30 to 40 students per year. And the school was very influential because as we're learning about spirituality and these stories about prophets that lived in ancient times and years ago, the struggles they went through, I'm also looking out the window at North Avenue, and I'm looking at people that are hard workers. I'm looking at the bus drivers, but I'm also looking at the drug dealers. I'm looking at the people that are, being prostituted. I'm looking at other things. And so we constantly had a reflection every single time we would read a verse. We could reflect on what was happening outside in both the challenges and also the beauty of humanity. And so my faith was really created through the mosque and being a Muslim, but my faith was also grown through the people that I had around me in Baltimore City, in that area. There was just such a confluence and, like you said, just an intersectionality of faith and community. And as well as being a Muslim, again, as I told you, my family is very Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up in a very Christian environment as well. So I was also influenced by gospel. I was also influenced by the Bible and spirituality and faith. And so it was very interesting. And also as a Muslim kid growing up in Baltimore in the late 80s, early 90s, I was the other all the time. So I always had to live in a space of the other. So I had to be black, which I love absolutely, the beauty of it. And then I would have to be Muslim as well. And then being from the inner city, it also built up a different kind of faith, because I just had to have a faith in God, but also a faith in my ability to survive just every day in the streets of Baltimore. So faith, it took a lot on a lot of different things. It comes from books, but it also comes from your experience.
Was the demographics of your school and your community growing up in the Muslim community in Baltimore, was it all black, or was there was there different racial demographics going on in your school?
Awesome question. It was all black. In regards to my school, yes, it was. However, I grew up on biryani. I grew up eating kebab and other treats, because my friends were Arab. My friends are Desi as well. But even growing up, we also had distinctions within our community. So sometimes we could bridge those gaps. So like I said, I have friends and acquaintances of all backgrounds, but we also would have our struggles between the folks that immigrated here and folks that were indigenous. So we had a debate, who's indigenous, who's really from here. We had debates over being a Muslim, and it was black and American. Were you Muslim enough? Because you weren't from an Eastern country, you're not really Muslim. You're a Black American Muslim. And so we definitely dealt with that as well. But then we also had a lot of strength in our community too, because we had to hold on to our faith, because I was the other so much that othering built a strong foundation.
That is so interesting. Okay, so you and I came together to have this conversation through Dr. Kayla Wheeler, who has been on this podcast before. And I want to get into some of the projects that you have been working on this year. But first of all, tell me a little bit about the projects that brought you together with our mutual friend, Dr. Wheeler.
Awesome question. So in 2015, in April, of course, the confluence of the world, I think, really changed a lot and really shifted after the murder of Freddie Gray. I think that was one of the first times during these recent attention have been brought to violence, police violence and things like that. The first conversation really took place in 2015, and I was invited by ICJS, Islamic Christian Jewish Studies organization in Towson, to come to be a part of a fellowship using faith to reimagine justice. And so we really started to look. Yeah, it was awesome. So we started to look at faith as a way to address issues of justice. And so they brought together Christians, Muslims, Jewish people, agnostic people. And then that was a wide range of backgrounds and beliefs and things like that, even within those faith traditions. And we looked at scripture. We looked at the Quran. We looked at the Torah. We looked at just how actually a lot of our prophets and things like that were actually rebels. They really weren't loved at that time.
Yeah.
Jesus was killed. He was killed in the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
And Moses was not loved. He was actually banished. Muhammad was banished. So these are actually all rebels that and women as well, from Mary Magdalene to all these other different faith folks that we look now back as heroes. They were actually rebels and fighting, and people that were fighting injustice at the time. And so we started to look at faith and right now, faith is also often looked at as the purveyor of injustice. But we started to look at how originally faith was how to look at faith as a place to find justice. So through that program, I met with also was able to meet with a lot of different intellectuals, including Dr. Morales, who's amazing.
Yeah.
And works over at Morgan at the CSRC program. And that's how I became friends with Dr. Wheeler and started working with her on the oral history project, because they saw the work we were doing with ICJS. Then they had me come to sit in a history class. It was about Islamic art history. And so I sat in there with other faith leaders, and we started to really challenge and say, hey, you're talking about Islamic art, but this is not Islamic art, it's Arab art. So even in that, as a Black man, I felt like my voice wasn't centered. And at the time, the conversation had kind of died down. This is in 2019. So the conversation around justice and things like that has just got reignited this year. But I was saying, look, this is another way of violence. This is another way of what some people call microaggressions, that you're saying Islam is only from a European concept. It's only from an Arab concept, and you don't count. And so as we started to have these conversations, they said, Karim, we need to tell our stories a lot more. I'm working on a project like that, and I'd love for you to join.
Amazing. That is so cool. And I know that you're working on something exactly like that. Like throughout this year, I've personally been following a bit about how communities are handling the shakeup of daily life that you mentioned earlier. You know, a year ago today, we had a totally different bedrock of routines that grounded our daily lives. And now we don't have that nearly as much. And innumerable things are different from this time last year. So I would love to know about your work with your research fellow position and the work that you did in Baltimore this summer to learn about and document this time with the Oral History and Ephemera Archive. And so I know that you've been working on this with Dr. Wheeler, but first off, what is this Oral History and Ephemera Archive project?
So the archive project is using different ways, and I participate in the oral history way, to be able to record oral histories during 2020, this year of extreme upheaval, of uprising, and also a reckoning. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Sure.
And so my part that I played was as a community researcher. So I engaged with 4 different organizations, public justice organizations, farming organizations, and actually a mosque as well, and looked at how their work was changing and impacted by COVID-19 and social justice upheaval around the world, and how their faith practices had to change, how their work had to change, and actually just redefining their work as well. We're in a year where we're redefining what it means to be a first responder. That's being challenged. Yeah. Who's a first responder? We know that we have police and firefighters who go to emergencies, but who's the first responder that when I'm going through something in my community I can't eat? Am I going to the police? Am I going to the firefighter? Or am I calling my local farmer and saying, hey, Farmer Chippy was one person that I interviewed. How do I get food? What does this mean? When my supermarket's literally closed down, how do I access food? How do I access food when just going outside could possibly kill me? We had other individuals that I was able to talk to as well, where they are working with people who are being threatened with eviction every day. So prior to the pandemic, they already were having issues around paying their own bills, around paying rent, which all of us deal with every day, and mortgage. And a lot of the individuals they work with are actually from the Latino community. So some people that are from the Latinx community dealing with language barriers already. And so being online and shifting online during COVID can already be a challenge. And then also if you're dealing with issues around immigration, because of all the attacks on immigrants now by this current administration, do I step outside and try to not get evicted or I'll be homeless, or do I stay inside because if I leave, my uncle or my mother may be arrested and sent back home and I'm by myself? And so those were some of the issues that we discussed a lot. So it was pretty heavy. It was a pretty heavy piece.
Did the archive project exist before you met Dr. Wheeler and Dr. Morales, or is this a brand new project that you have been kind of implementing over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so my engagement with it started over the summer. I know for them, this is a new project that within the last year that they were pushing forward with. They really wanted to center Black voices in regards to oral history, center voices that typically, from marginalized people that typically are not recorded. And with this year, like everything else, they had to shift. And so it became I think it almost went from a passion project to an absolutely necessary critical project for how we're going to move forward in this next century, to be honest with you. And
Yeah.
I don't mean for it to be that heavy, but it is, because we have to capture these stories to see how are we really as human beings going to move forward. And so they started to use this project as a way to be able to do that research. They provided grants to each of these organizations that we interviewed. And then they did the oral history piece to kind of follow up with them and to say, okay, how have the grants impacted you? How has your work been impacted? And so I thought it was a really interesting piece that the organization that was actually giving them funding was also centering their voices. And so you almost had an immediate evaluation of funding, because sometimes we don't question this nonprofit industrial system that we have set up around the world. We don't question it. We just say, hey, I got $50. I'm gonna just throw my money this way, against the wall. It worked because I gave money to this person. But really, do we know if it worked?
Right.
Just because you gave that money with good intent.
Absolutely.
And so I thought it was an amazing way to, in real time, evaluate what you were doing as a program, but also be able to center these voices that often are not centered.
So I'm going to ask in a little bit about like the specific different groups that you chatted with and like what their stories were and what you personally learned from the different groups that you talked to. But first, I'm just curious about what your approach was for finding who you wanted to talk to, and then what you would do to like conduct these interviews, and like where you would go, how you would set them up and things like that. I'm just curious about like the nuts and bolts.
Awesome. So I definitely didn't do it on my own, for sure. I worked with awesome, amazing research assistant. Actually, she's a grad student at Harvard, Ariana Laws. And she would work with me. She basically worked with me to take the notes and guide the conversation. And then I was a person that actually recorded. So we recorded on Zoom using the Zoom format, which is its own interesting piece, how Zoom has become so critical to all of our lives as we're on now. And so we had everyone on Zoom, and then we just emailed them, reached out to them. Some of the groups we chose who we were going to interview, and then some were assigned to us. But all the groups we had were pretty amazing and very diverse in their approach to helping community. And then we just interviewed them over several sessions. Most sessions were about an hour to an hour and a half, because I think folks were ready to share their story. So that was interesting. I think in the beginning when we were doing our training, we were like, all right, people don't want to answer these questions or ask these questions, but I mean, people were ready to share. I think it was cathartic for them as well as us as interviewers. I think it was an exchange. So I thought that was cool as well.
Nice.
So yeah, that's pretty much the setup.
Nice. So I know that you were involved in this project over the summer where you interviewed these number of different organizations, including religious communities, legal communities, farmers as well. Did you have like a goal going into the interviews, like what you were seeking to learn? Like, did you have like a thread that you were trying to tie between all the different groups that you talked to?
Yes. I think the thread, I think when I started, I didn't know what I wanted to, because I was a journalism major actually at Towson in undergrad.
Oh, cool.
And so I had some training, a little bit of training a while ago, and just how to interview and engage with people, but also as an educator, which I've been for well over 15 years, and a researcher. I found that honestly, if you just connect with people on a human level, that you'll be able to really get from them what their experience was. And so I would say one thread that I had was to connect with their humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want that to sound like cheesy or like everybody. I want to connect with your humanity. Like I really wanted to know, like, yo, what are you going through?
Yeah.
Not I have to agree with you. Not we believe the same things, not our politics, but like, yo, are you good?
Yeah.
And for those that can't see me, I'm like looking at Gregory right now on the screen. Yo, are you good? Like, and sometimes we've gotten away from that, where it's like, all right, this guy's asking me this. What does he want? What does she want? Where to go? No, like, are you okay? Like, as a human, yeah, I'm all right. Are you okay? And so I really wanted to connect with that human thread. But then also, I wanted people to be able to talk about their real feelings around COVID. So we asked questions around, where did it come from? What was the response? What was the impact of that response on your organization? We asked very specific questions, like, do you think that it was, we even asked, do you believe in the conspiracy like around it? We didn't ask a direct question, but that came out. A lot of people felt that there were some conspiracies around it. Everyone, I think, had a strong response to the government's reaction. It's interesting because the state versus local. Statewide, we're in Maryland. So the governor that's here, who's actually a Republican governor, had one of the best responses, but now it's kind of controversial as well.
Right.
So we got into that, how he's now responded and trying to get kids back into school. And then we talked about the response from the federal government, from Donald Trump, his administration, and their lack of response to it. And so people had some feelings around it. Some are very visceral, the way that people reacted. But again, I wanted a human thread. There were some really interesting things that came out of each group, and I know we're going to dive into that next. But that human theme kept on coming through. Just the way that people had to go out and find new allies, and then also find that there were allies right in front of them, literally outside the door they never knew existed. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, let's dive in. So this is a podcast that's mostly about religion of the world. So what I want to do is I want to start with the Muslim group, the mosque that you chatted with. And I'm curious about who you engaged with at this mosque, what this mosque is, the community is like, and then how you came to chat with them as opposed to like maybe some other groups in town.
Great question. So the first person that, the mosque that we interviewed was the Muslim Community Center of Baltimore. I interviewed Imam Earl Alamin. And Imam Earl is a very interesting guy. He's been around the community for well over 50 years, grew up a Muslim. He's a brother now that's in his late 60s. And so he literally grew up like almost as a child, from like a teenager, and seeing just the many evolutions of the religion of Islam here in America. And so through him, he talked a little bit about just how COVID really was almost shocking for that community, because it's it's an older community. The average age is probably over about 55. And so COVID, as we know, affected our seniors tremendously.
Yeah.
Those over 220,000 souls that we've lost has been, incredible. And in the mosque, it's interesting because they had to shift a lot of their focus. They had to shift prayer. So they couldn't pray together, because just the thing that heals you could kill you.
Right.
And that was a really interesting dynamic, because just standing next to your brother and sister, which for us, as Muslims, we stand in line and we touch toe to toe, heel to heel, foot to foot. That's actually to help to create that it's like a synergy between people. And it's almost like how yoga, when you're doing different yoga positions and things like that, it creates a synergy between individuals, and it's an energy that's felt when you're just standing there next to somebody you may know or don't know and praying. And just that act of spirituality, just for it to be broken down, severely affected people. Like, people were really sad. People missed it. They couldn't go to Juma, which is every Friday. That's our I guess equivalent to church service. You couldn't be in person, so you had to shift everything online. So they shifted a lot of prayers. They shifted Juma online. And also funerals was very interested. So funerals in Islam is called the janazah. And with the janazah prayer, there was a shift where you have to have at least I think it's like over 5 or 6 people to attend your funeral. As a Muslim, you want to have at least 40 people come to pray for you. But because of the restrictions, we couldn't bury our brothers or sisters like we usually do. Because as Muslims, we wrap them up into cloths. We put them into the casket. Then when we get to the burial ground, we have to take them out of the casket and put them into the ground.
Wow.
And it's a part of our tradition to actually put the dirt on top of that person as the last act that you can do for that person. And so it's very cathartic. It's very spiritual, as you can see. And so to not have that experience, to have other people bury people, or to have to look at a janazah online, or to know that a very close person to you, because a lot of some of our seniors died during this time, and I myself actually lost somebody that was really that was close to me in the community, and it was a lot of confusion around going to his funeral, and that hurt, because to have somebody that was a part of your life and you can't tell them goodbye it's a lot, and so he talked about that transition to online formats, and that people really missed it. People really missed that.
Are there any, how have they been changing? So now we've been living in this new, COVID land since mid-March about, and so now we're halfway through October. So it's been several months at this point. I'm curious if there's been a shift in away from the total lockdowns, and if they've been reconvening in person, or how they've been adapting over time during the summer when we had some lower points of infection rates and things like that. How has it been changing for this group over time?
Great question. So the way that it's been shifting is that in the beginning, you could only have maybe a very small group of people to go in to wash the bodies for janazah, or to pray. So initially it was maybe 10 people that would come to prayer. But now that mosque and other mosques have started to open up, where people have had to wear masks. They still social distance when they pray, and people can also people are getting temperature checks. So that happens as well when they're coming to pray. And so those things have shifted since the high points, like you said, in March and April. But with the constant shifting, it's weird, because at some of the other mosques, there have been outbreaks of coronavirus in different places, like everywhere else. And so there's still a lot of nervousness and trepidation around coming in physically as well. So it's been a mixed bag, like everybody else. Do I come in to pray because I'm feeling spiritually worn, which is something that he talked a lot about, Imam Earl, and people feeling like they couldn't connect? Or do I stay at home and stay safe? So it's been a hybrid. It's been a hybrid of sorts.
What about your own worship and your own practice? How are you adapting and handling all this flux in your daily routines?
Great question. It's been interesting. At times, this is my first Ramadan. That's when we fast, which is in May.
Mm-hmm.
Where pretty much I was by myself in regards to community. I'm married and I have my family that's there with me, but not being able to connect with people during this time of fast was tough, was challenging. But it actually was one of my best that I've ever had. It was one of the best, because I really reflected. It wasn't about going to this person's dinner. It wasn't I got to wake up now and go here and run here for work, because everything was at home.
Yeah.
And so I really was able to pray and really look inside myself and say, okay, now that all the trappings have been taken away, I'm a huge sports fan. I'm a Ravens fan. I'm basketball and all that. So sports was taken away from me, and that's a huge thing for me. And going outside and interacting, I'm an extrovert by nature. So just having to just sit with my own thoughts and say, what does that mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to me to be a Muslim? How does my practice look? So I would say it really was actually one of my best because I was able to, it was very cathartic just to sit and say, what does it mean to be a Muslim in this current state? And then how do I re-engage with the world? And so for myself, I've had to shift that a lot. But it's also been very, hurtful at times to not be able to even just shake hands with people that you love and miss. And so my first time going to prayer altogether was probably about a little less than a month ago. And it was a weird experience because it was like, I love being here, but I got to go because I don't know who has corona. I don't know if I'm going to make one of my elders sick. So do I hug them? Do I touch them? Or do I just give them an air high five and leave? But then it's like, that feels phony. So It's like, what do you do? So it's been weird. It's been weird. The shift has been weird.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to glean a little bit of positivity about that because, like, removing the trappings of modernity, like, our sports and like seeing our certain shows and going to our certain meetings and sitting in traffic and things like that, you remove those trappings and it does produce this opportunity to look deeply within oneself. So I'm glad that you were able to seize that moment instead of, grasping for it but not achieving it. That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Because I think it's life. Like you grasp it, but you're not gonna achieve it. You're constantly trying to like perfect it. You're constantly perfecting it. And I think this year really reminded us that we are constantly in that process.
I want to chat a little bit as well about another one of the groups that you chatted with this summer, and that's the legal community. I'm
Yes.
curious why you pursued interviews with legal offices when you were also pursuing these interviews with spiritual communities. What does the legal aspect have to do with this project that you were doing in this big work?
It's so interesting. That's such a great question. That's such a great question.
Yeah.
And because a lot of times when we think of legal, when we think of faith, they're very separate. But if we look at it, our judicial system is set up off of faith. And so, we always look at them as like opposite. We look at like legal as being more cold and calculated, and men and women making decisions. And then faith is, okay, that's God, it's something spiritual. But actually, if you look at it, our rules are set up off of whether we like it or not, the 10 Commandments and those things of thou shalt not kill and covet thy neighbor and things of that nature. So it was interesting engaging with these legal organizations who really were pro bono groups who work with individuals that were possibly going to be evicted, and also individuals dealing with other different community issues. So that was interesting because law is extremely important. Because even though we're in the midst of COVID, people are still getting evicted.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, people are still getting evicted. And it was frightening. I can't lie. Like I can't believe that's coming out my mouth, but like I was frightened for them because you're in a place where you're like, I have to go out because I'm about to be evicted. So let me engage with this community group, which I rely on so much. But how do I engage with them? Can I see them physically? So even those groups themselves, they had to transition. So that was interesting too. So those legal groups that are helping people to resist being evicted, they had to then challenge themselves. They had to challenge the judicial system to say, hey, just because I didn't paperclip this or put this on this type of paper, that person shouldn't be set outside and be homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was almost like the legal system had to look at themselves and say, you're right, this doesn't make sense. Like we can do this online and not go through all these different draconian ways of punishing people because your staple wasn't right or you didn't check this box and you should have checked the other box. And so they were saying they had to challenge the legal system. And they said, surprisingly, some of the court systems like some of the new ways of engaging with the court system. Also dealing with, so that was wild. That was wild. I was like, wow, okay, really? Also, some of the individuals they work with have health challenges even before COVID. And so during COVID, you had to stay home. And so for those individuals that may resist going to court because they simply couldn't leave their home that they may be evicted from, we're now able to have eviction court or be able to engage with a judge or someone else online and these officials online, and it made it much more fluid. But also they did feel a sense of loss of connecting with the people that they work with. So that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then themselves, they dealt with issues. One of the groups that I interviewed when we came on, we started talking about how COVID impacted them. That was one of our questions. And they actually had someone die from their staff from COVID that morning. And so just having someone from their community, from their ecosystem to pass away from COVID as they're trying to adjust to COVID themselves personally was very challenging because they couldn't even be sad with each other. They had to build this online community to even grieve. And so for them with these legal organizations, they had to shift how they engage with faith and their faith practices. And also for them, it showed the importance of connecting with the groups that they work with. And so I just felt like it was such an incredible conversation. It was such an incredible.
I feel like there's a huge new awareness among so many people of like seeing challenges of other communities in a brand new way that we've been completely invisible to for so long. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
You also mentioned a farmer. What's going on with food? What are you doing with food as well in this project?
Absolutely. So Plantation Park Heights is an organization championed by several people, but Farmer Chippy, who is the founder of it. So Farmer Chippy is actually, I want to say he's an engineer by training, and extremely intelligent guy from Trinidad. And the reason why I bring that up is he talks a lot about his being raised in Trinidad and how that impacted how he wanted to bring a lot of the traditions of growing your own food in Trinidad. I have family from Trinidad too, so I was able to connect with him there. And just how he was able to bring that island flavor, that island love, and that self-reliance to Park Heights. And so he has several acres of land in Park Heights where he grows all sorts of fruits and vegetables. He also cooks for the youth that come to the program. So they actually pick what they eat. So it's literally farm to table, like right there. What you pick, they actually prepare. And with Farmer Chippy, which was cool, was that he's this extremely intelligent guy, but very passionate. And it's a passion you rarely see in community. You have people that are excited, but his passion is like, it's infectious. And so he talked about how the kids, if I could take you on a route, the farm is like behind, in Baltimore, we have a lot of row houses. Mm-hmm. So behind a lot of these row houses, you either have large fields. Some have been abandoned because there were homes there, where others was just always grass fields. And so he converted this large plot of land into a greenhouse. And where the land is actually in between where youth walk through to go to the local elementary school.
Amazing.
So as they're walking through, they're literally being fed along the way. But now, instead of being along the way, he's the stop. So that kids came to him and did their online schooling while they were sitting there learning about farming, while they were talking about, hey, Farmer Chippy, I don't want to go back home right now because why? No one's there. Or I don't want to be home because school was my escape. You were my escape from a challenging background and a challenging home situation. And so he became a refuge for a lot of kids during that time. And that he had to literally, kids would be there from the morning to at night, just eating with him, just studying with him and things like that, and re-engaging with food. And it was crazy. It was crazy. So like, I love that. I love that interview. I don't want to say I had a necessarily like one favorite, but that was definitely one that stood out for me just because of just like, wow, like he went from building on this land with people like, why are you doing this? Almost like a Moses effect. It's kind of crazy. I know we're talking about religion, but he almost had a Moses impact. It was, or like where he was going off to the mountains and no one knew why, or shall I say really almost like Noah. He built this ark right in the middle of everything, this ark of food. And then everyone was like, what are you talking about? We have the market here. We have the market here. And he was like, yo, it's going to rain one day. There's going to be a time where you cannot get to where you got to go. And this time came. And so it was almost prophetic in the way that he was engaging with food before. And now that he's so much needed even more is incredible.
He's got to be like a local hero at this point then.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I would please look him up.
That is so cool.
Yeah, he's cool.
Well, this is like such a cool project that you and Dr. Wheeler and Dr. Morales have going on. And I know that you have a whole bunch of other stuff in the works too. Like whenever you and I were emailing, you said that you're working on a collection for a literary publication for youth ages 14 through 24. I'm curious about this book project that you have in the works, in addition to your research fellowship that you're also doing.
Yes, so I appreciate it, man. So additionally, with the research that I'm doing, I am working on a book with a group of youth from West Baltimore. The group is called Voices of 21217. It's a collaborative effort that I'm doing with other community members, where we're working with youth ages 14 to 24. And we were working at first on a literary project to try to really start to, again, center youth voice. What we found is a lot of books, anthology, and things that are done for youth are either kept in the neighborhoods that they're in, or it's people from the outside coming in saying, hey, I want you to share this story. Now let me share your narrative and move on. So we said, no, we want to empower them to be able to write for themselves. And the book is actually being published by a Black woman-owned publishing company as well, called Girl Power Press. And when we began the process, actually in March, this was right at the time when COVID occurred.
Yeah.
And so we shifted from just centering Black voices to talking about COVID. And then that grew into a larger conversation around social justice. And so it was like in real time, this book was being developed. And so now it's we have a working title now, 2020, the year of the reckoning, where we're going to be doing it's going to be a photography. And also we'll include writing, literary writing from youth ages 14 to 24. So it'll be poetry, short stories, narratives. They write about their experience through COVID. Some have written creative stories about COVID, their responses to COVID, and also the photos that are going to be in there are going to be great. We're actually working with the youth. They're going to be training with professional photographers to take photos of what's going on now. And so it's been amazing. And so it's voicesof21217.com. And we've been rocking all summer. And since then, we've, including talking to yourself on this amazing podcast, we also are working on a collaboration with the Smithsonian Institute that's coming up soon.
Sweet.
So that's going to be kind of dope. You're actually the first person I'm announcing with now, but
amazing.
We're still working on the kinks of everything. But yeah, hopefully that's going to come through. And we're going to continue to use our arts as healing. And so you'll be seeing us. You'll be hearing a lot from us very soon.
I love that. In your impression, how are the kids that you're working with doing? Like, is everybody managing okay? Have they are they feeling like using this as a creative time? Are they struggling? What is going on in your view?
Great question, Gregory. I'm gonna kind of turn that on you just for a second.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
I go every day lately. I've been waking up, and I have a 7-year-old, and
Okay.
I have a job, but I also work from home. So I'm not seeing many people. I'm not really doing much. I'm exercising and I'm like hanging out with my kid. And so every day I wake up and I'm kind of like, oh, this again, and it's kind of one of these things where I feel like I'm stuck in a loop. And so I do have good days and I do have bad, I think, just like so many people out there, but I'm trying to just keep doing the projects that inspire me, that keep me motivated to keep learning, instead of just getting sucked down a rabbit hole of negativity, because it's so easy to go one way or the other. And I'm clawing my way through this, just like I feel like so many other people.
So many people are. I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's what the kids, they were going through something very similar. We're doing this again, but the insecurity of it all was very interesting. And adults don't know everything.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of the conversation. Adults don't know everything. And it's almost like as a kid, like, and I was asking you that because, you know, as a kid, we have one perspective, and then we grow up as an adult and we're like, wow, my parents weren't perfect, or they didn't know everything. But now, like, simultaneously throughout the world, all the kids are realizing adults don't know what they're doing. So it's almost like the veil is being lifted up, which I'm sure your 7-year-old is going through as well. And so I think that was a big part of the conversation. A lot of you felt like one of the kids was enjoying his 16th birthday, but he was trying to figure out where to go that was open. And so it's little stuff like that normally just being 16 and going to a party is a really simple thing. But now it's like, if I leave, my friends might die.
Yeah.
One of the kids talked about not being able to swim and just not being in the pool. He's a swimmer.
Yeah.
And he talked a lot about just like, yo, that's what I really miss, is like just swimming. And he told his story about that. A lot of kids feel like they're not being listened to, as most youth do. But I think now even more, they are not feeling listened to, and they're feeling very frustrated. A lot of them are really feeling frustrated with, and this was a common theme in America with white supremacy.
Yeah.
That came out a lot.
Yeah.
And just issues around white supremacy. What does that actually mean? How can we destroy these systems? How can we be that generation that really starts to see a shift in that? And that really, the conversations were so intelligent around that lack of security, but also some strength and resiliency as well. But their strength is just like, yo, like it was just incredible. I got so much just being around them. Because when I asked them to write, as a teacher, sometimes you kind of not necessarily got to force it, but you're like, all right, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. But like, I would give them a prompt, they were ready, because it was almost like they were waiting for somebody to ask them, how do you feel? So that's why I asked you that, Gregory, just like, yo, how do you feel? And when you do that, people will let you know, and you'll get goosebumps, just the stories they're telling you, because just the way you connect, and then also just their perspectives, just as you. One particular thing that I like to say is that some of the youth that I have disabilities. And working with youth that have disabilities is really interesting, because when you don't have that therapy, when you're not getting that engagement with your fellow classmates, it becomes even more of a challenge. So again, I know I began with the conversation with othering. And so I know with some of my youth that may have disabilities, just talking about that and how they want to still navigate the world. It already was challenging before, but now they have to navigate the world with another barrier. And so I can't wait till you guys get a chance to read their stories. We're looking to have the book published by spring of 2021. So please visit the website. We also will be sharing stories on our Instagram page. It's voicesof21217.com is our website, and voicesof21217 on IG. And yeah, we're going to start to really start to just express where these youth are coming from. And I hope that through this project, I could become a vessel for helping youth to tell that story. And when I say a vessel, not in some holy way, but just like, my role is to say, like, yo, here's your microphone. Tell people what you need. Tell people what you want.
I love it. Well, Brother Karim Amin, I have absolutely loved our conversation. I am super excited for the book. I know that you and Dr. Wheeler are also working on some reporting for the oral history and ephemera archive interviews that you all did this summer. I'm really looking forward to all this work. And as those pieces come out in the coming months, I will be sending people I'll be making people aware that these exist. So I'm really excited for people to see the work that you all are doing over there. Are there any other places that you would direct people's attention to, in addition to the Voices of 21217 website or the Instagram? Is there any other places that people need to check out?
Yeah, CSRC. This is actually the study that we're doing now. So I will go to that website. CSRC, I think it's .edu. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm going to have Dr. Morales on the show as well.
Oh, perfect.
So I will have him. I'll have him chat about all that stuff.
Awesome. So I will go there. they're what they're doing is it's so different. Just to have this online space to be able to share stories is very important. So I would definitely direct people to do that. And then the last thing I would say is I would direct people to listen to your podcast, because I think this is interesting. Faith during this time is like really interesting, just how people are looking at faith and redefining what that actually means. And so I think that's very important. And I would just encourage everybody here to say that it's okay to not be okay. If you're listening, it's okay to not be okay. And to get therapy. Myself, I'm doing therapy. Get therapy, please.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not like directing it or trying to sell anything, but like I feel like right now I just want to connect with people as humans. Like if you can, try to get to them. There's some online resources that are out there, but if you can, please do that, because it's important while we're in the house and we're going through these routines that we check on our mental health. And that was a common theme throughout. It's just, check on your mental health.
Well, this is also therapy for me, so I'm super grateful to you for your time today to have a chat about this in this open and honest way about all the struggles that people are dealing with in this country and around the world at the moment. So, Brother Karim, thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas. I've had a real pleasure chatting with you today.
Me too. Had a good time. Thank you.